I want to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Patricia Delden. I'm a professor in the departments of psychology and psychiatry at the University of Michigan. I'm also the deputy director of the Depression Center. And I'm also CEO of a company called Mood Lifters. Camille, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Camille Davra. I recently graduated from the University of Michigan and was an All-American runner in cross country and was also part of a Big Ten championship team in cross country. And during my time at Michigan, I found Mood Lifters, and I'm just really happy to be here and talk to you about Mood Lifters from a student athlete perspective.
Thanks. So I just want to first start out talking about the general issue. We are, obviously, I'm living proof. We are still going through an epidemic of physical kind, but we also are having a mental health epidemic. And here's the problem. Since in my time as a professor, we've seen dramatic increases in pretty much every form, not every form, but a lot of forms of psychopathology, such as depression and anxiety and stress. And as you can see, this is affecting both men and women. But it's really particularly impacting young people. So as you can see, as each generation gets younger, we see higher lifetime prevalences of, in this case, major depression. I'll be talking about depression today a lot because that's my research area, but it's also, Mood Lifters is for a general population, not just those with depression. But as you can see with depression, as the cohorts get younger and younger, the prevalence rates get higher and higher. So people my age and older, by the end of our lives, we have about a 12% lifetime prevalence. Camille's age group already is in a 25 or higher percent. So younger people are doing worse. And you guys are seeing this live in your university, as I am as well. I used to be the head of the clinical psych program and part of the psychology department. And we found there that the vast majority of people, especially who are graduate students, are drop out due to mental health concerns. And these are the common problems you're seeing. You have depression rates of up to 40%, particularly among college students, both undergrads and grads, suicidal thoughts, huge levels of anxiety, and so on. And of course, you already know, large binge drinking. Now, this is true prior to the pandemic, but as you can see, in most cases, except for binge drinking, it's gotten worse during COVID. So these are the statistics that got me really interested. I'm trained as a neuroscientist, and most of my research prior to Mood Lifters had been in studying the brain in people with schizophrenia and depression. But I really got concerned. I kept hearing study after study, and actually research in our own department is showing that the vast majority of graduate students in our department, we did a survey, who dropped out of mental health for mental health concerns. And this really upset me. Like, if we, one of the number one psychology departments in the country, can't take care of our own grad students, how, and this is why they're dropping out. It just seemed like such a shame. And we know, and you guys are probably seeing it, at least 25% of the University of Michigan undergrads come in on psych meds. Because why? 75% of mental illnesses appear by the age of 24. Right now, 41% of the US college students are reporting depression. And of those who get to your CAPS or other forms of treatment, 33% of those who receive mental health services are considering suicide. And this is really common. So 13% of the whole population of students are thinking about suicide. 6% went as far as to have had plans. 1% have attempted, and about a quarter of them are purposely self-injuring. And this has real consequences. Since the year 2000, so 20 years ago, since turn of the millennial, we've had increased suicide rate by 40%. It's dipped a little bit during the pandemic, but in general, this is not a trajectory that we want to see. So you guys are dealing with a lot, both either if you're from athletic departments, you're seeing it in your athletes. If you're more general mental health, in mental health in general in your university, you're seeing that this is a huge number. Like, how can you ever treat 40% of your undergrad population or your grad population? It's huge. It's a huge problem. And there are three, what I call A's, limiting care. The first one is affordability of care, availability of clinicians, accessibility to evidence-based care, and then acceptability by constituents. So these are the problems you're facing. Specifically, there's research that shows nearly 90% of counseling centers at universities reported an increase in students seeking services. And you're struggling to recruit enough therapists for students in crisis. You're overburdened, underpaid, burned out. Many therapists are leaving college counseling centers for less stressful work and better pay. So you guys are struggling to get and maintain providers. But again, how many providers would you need to treat 40% of your population? It's kind of a staggering number if you use traditional care. And most programs and most therapists in the United States don't use science-based care. And that's really important to me as a hard-nosed scientist. We know what works for folks, and we want to make sure that everyone is getting the best care possible. But only 21% are receiving care that is consistent with American Psychological Society guidelines. And without this standard of care, people are vulnerable to ineffective or even harmful treatment. I always say, bad care, or if we don't even know it works, care is worse than not having care at all, because we think that we're doing something good, but we actually might not be. So it's taking resources away from potentially really effective treatments. So a lot of universities, including my own, are turning to apps, but most apps have not been thoroughly tested. And again, I really believe that everything should be evidence-based. And recently in popular science, the mental wellness apps are considered the wild west of therapy. They're booming, but few have actually been vetted. And some of the advice, because it hasn't been vetted, and they can pretty much say or do whatever, they aren't regulated. Some of the advice offered by these apps can actually be harmful. When I first started this program, I really thought those were the main reasons people didn't come for care. But in reality, the number one reasons people don't seek care is because of stigma. Now, it's true, and Camille's generation is a lot better than my generation in terms of stigma. But as she'll mention, in the athlete population, the stigma is really there. So most people, 70% of people who don't seek care don't do it for this reason. They don't, they want to fix it on their own, and they don't want to be seen as someone who has a problem, especially in the athletic community. So all this was bugging me. So every meeting I'd go to, I was president of a society, and every time I'd go to a board meeting or other kinds of meetings within the university or anywhere, we'd all be saying the same things. How are we going to get care to people? We don't have enough care. We got to make sure it's all evidence-based care. And people were just really, really struggling with this problem, including me, because I went into this field for a singular reason, and that was to help people. So I had been struggling myself with coming up with, again, as a neuroscientist, I was like, this isn't my domain. This isn't my problem, when in actuality it is, because I went into this field to help people. So a little background on the story. So I had been complaining to a colleague about needing to lose weight from the birth of my second child. And he dragged me to Weight Watchers, kicking and screaming because I said the same things that we hear people say who don't want to go to care. I don't need help. I can do it on my own. I used to be a college athlete. I can do this. And he's like, Patty, you sound like our patients. Just come with me. So I went reticently, but then I lost 35 pounds. And he had said and he was actually Chris Peterson, who's a very famous positive psychologist. And he said, it's really excellent in terms of psychology, motivation, there's all this great science behind it. So I went, and I thought, and I lost 35 pounds in about 3 or 4 months. I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome. And so one day I just turned to him, I said, why don't we have something like this for mental health? An effective, science-based, peer-led, scalable, and affordable program that has no wait list and is available in every county of the United States. If you today decide that you want to go get some help with losing weight, you can join Weight Watchers today. And it's the best program out there. And so I thought about that, and I turned to him, I said, why don't we do this? He's like, you can't do that. That's impossible. And so that's what I thought. So I spent the next few years coming up with this program called Mood Lifters, because I wanted to be able to get high quality care. Weight Watchers is often rated as the #1 program in the United States. and they treat millions of people. And I thought, we need to do this. So I went off and I essentially created Weight Watchers for mental health. So we have Mood Lifters is an effective, science-based, peer-led, scalable, and affordable mental health program that has no wait list, and we hope will be available in every county of the United States. So as you saw, I am the CEO of a company. As you also probably saw, I'm uncompensated. My goal for having a company isn't to make money personally. My goal is to try to use the business and behavioral change model of Weight Watchers in order to get this out to millions of people. And again, to make sure it is high quality and evidence-based. So that's what we did. My students and I created an innovative, paradigm shifting, science-based wellness program that has now been shown to improve mental health, mental wellness in general, and decreases anxiety and depression for very low cost. So some things that were really important to me is to make sure that it was available, accessible, acceptable, and affordable. But I really wanted it to be really robustly based in science. I'm trained, as I said, neuroscientist who does psychopathology research. So I'm an expert in understanding what causes these. So coming from that perspective, I built this Mood Lifters program around what we know about the very best of clinical science. So first thing that was really important to me is we at Michigan talk about people as having depressions, not a single kind of depression. People come to depression for multiple positions. Some people seem to have a really strong biological predisposition. Others have other kinds of causes and consequences of their depression. Again, this is true for anxiety and other illnesses as well. So we want to make sure that we had a comprehensive biopsychosocial approach. I also want to make sure that whatever I built was good for everyone. It wasn't just good for people who met clinically significant major depression or clinically significant anxiety. We wanted it to work for everyone so we could help all comers. Because actually, frankly, most people who come to our clinic don't have a significant diagnosis, clinical diagnosis. So we wanted to cut across disease and healthy states to make sure that everyone could come. We wanted to be run by peers to decrease in stigma. So in my Weight Watchers experience, I have a PhD, and you don't need a PhD to know you have to eat less and move more. That's pretty much what Weight Watchers teach you. But what I needed was hope and sort of a strategy and support in doing that. So my Weight Watchers leader was a real estate agent who lost 175 pounds the 5th time she tried. She made it seem like I could do it. I could lose that 35 pounds that I needed. And so it was really important to me that this be like that. And I frankly, had it been some registered dietitian who never had a weight problem, and told me that what I needed to do from above and sort of, lecture, I would feel not nearly as hopeful because I knew what I needed to do, but I needed support and hope that I could do it. And then also having all those people in the audience with me or in the room in the meeting with me was really important because we helped each other. We cheered each other on. We gave each other strategies. I didn't feel alone in my weight loss goal. So we took those important parts of the meeting of my Weight Watchers experience and put it into Mood Lifters. The main components that I borrowed from Weight Watchers, I went off to a fellowship and thought about what exactly was it that helped me to make so much improvement. And in Weight Watchers, I'm not sure if you are familiar with the model, but you go in the old days, used to go in and weigh in front of 2 people, which was really an important component for me. It was that accountability piece. And then we went to meetings where we talked about how to eat less and move more, eat healthier and move and more with more joy. And then the main part of Weight Watchers was each food item was this points program. Each food item had a certain number of points. Say a donut might be 15, an apple might be 1. And you get a certain point cutoff, say 30. And so you could eat as much food as you wanted up until 30, and then you had to stop if you wanted to lose exactly 1.5 to 2 pounds of weight. Can you imagine if we could predict with such accuracy how much people will improve in depression or anxiety week by week like they could in Weight Watchers for weight? So that was my goal. So instead, though, for Mood Lifters, I took that basic framework, and again, I applied everything that I know about clinical science to this program. So instead of checking in terms of weighing in, they check in, and they do this before each meeting with a leader to discuss their weekly goals that they met, how they're doing in general. And we also screen them online with a VAS scale to see how they're doing across about 30 different dimensions. Then they come to meetings 1 hour a week, and those groups are run by peer leaders and helpers. And each week we talk about a new topic that has, I cherry picked the very best of strategies that I know from the field that help most people to feel better. And we cover those topics. And then at the end of the meeting, people set weekly goals based on the weekly topic. And they're personalized. They get to start where they're at. So they gain points for meeting those goals. So let's say, for example, we're talking about exercise, which we do in one of our first meetings, because we know exercise is equally effective to antidepressants in terms of antidepressant effects, helps anxiety, depression, self-esteem, and all kinds of things. But you just heard Camille. So Camille would be like, she'd go to that meeting, and we have this goal of 30 minutes a week of exercise. And she'd come and she'd go like 30 minutes, that's my warm up, you know? But let's say I'm depressed, not getting out of bed, 30 minutes, I'd be like, are you crazy? There's no way. So we'd both be shaking our heads at the leader if they said, you need to do 30 minutes of running. So instead, what we say to Camille is, you need to continue training in a way that makes you feel great. And Patty, this week, you need to get out of bed every week. You get out of bed every week and take a shower, you get a point. If I'm depressed and not get out of bed. Next week, my goal would be to walk to the mailbox. And maybe the next week would be to walk down the street, shaping my behavior, getting closer and closer to that 30 minutes. So again, remember I mentioned that I wanted to really have a biopsychosocial approach. So we have this is the content of the meetings across each of these dimensions. We have so there's 15-week meetings for the basic program. So each of these topics, we cover about 3 of them for each meeting. So for the content areas for biology, we talk about sleep and exercise, diet, things like that. For the cognition, we talk about the cognitive changes, thought changes from CBT and other kinds of thought strategies. And then we talk about emotional regulation via DBT and other kinds of strategies, as well as behavior and social. I have to apologize. I'm just going to check in. Am I making sense? Because I realize that with COVID, I'm having a little bit of a hard time. Is it all going okay? Camille, is everything okay?
Yep.
Everybody else, thumbs up? Okay, good. Please stop me if you have questions. I do apologize for this. So anyways, like I said, it's 15 weeks. The basic program for undergraduates and grad students, it's 12 weeks. And we cover these different topics. So I'll give you an example of what it's like in our meeting. So let's talk about cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy is the #1 strategy for reducing depression and anxiety. And so what we do is we took that literature, put it into sort of a layperson language, and we cover that in a meeting. And so an example, I'm going to ask you guys to do this with me. So in the meeting, we do something like this. So I'm going to ask you all to participate. So get ready to hit the chat button. So let's imagine, I want you to do a thought experiment with me. And this, like I said, this is an example of what we do in the cognitive meeting. So I want you to do it with me. So imagine that you're at home alone and it's a stormy night and there's lightning flashing, your power goes out, and all of a sudden you hear the doorknob shake. How would you feel? Go ahead and pop it in the chat button. Scared, startled, right? Anyone else? Concerned, right? So what if I told you that you're me? Yeah, I took the photo. Yes, I did. It's my hobby that I do for my pleasure points, by the way. Okay, let's say you're me and you have a college student who goes to Michigan State and they're expected to be home that night and you're worried about them. How would I feel? Relieved, right? So the doorknob shaking doesn't change, the context doesn't change, but how I interpret that situation change. And that's the fundamental role that that's basically what we teach in cognitive behavioral therapy in that thought meeting. That's an example. Okay. Let's see. All right. So the big question is, does it work? And how do we know if it works? So what we do is we have two ways of measuring that. We first have the pre and post measures, where we ask people to fill out questionnaires prior to starting the meeting, and then between meeting 14 and 15. Okay. And we want to see change and improvement between the pre and the post measure. And we look at all those areas that we're interested, the 5 areas, plus I put sleep in there because I think I'm a sleep scientist and sleep is really, really critical to all forms of mental health. So we measure across these 6 different domains, pre and post. But we also had that check-in, if you remember, that each week we're monitoring how people are doing. So we have data from that as well. And so we have tested this a lot. So we started out the pre-pilot in our lab back in 2015. We did a pilot in 2016. We've since run 2 randomized control trials. The first one looking at the general adult program, where we randomly assign people to peer professionally led groups, because again, we had to make sure that peers could actually run this program or to a wait list. We just finished in July a second RCT where we again randomly assign graduate students to an active condition versus a waitlist condition. So a mood lifters condition relative to a waitlist. In our company and across all of our research and our pilots, we've run around 1,300 people at all. So first thing we want to know is, would people come? Is this a feasible model? How would people feel? It doesn't feel like traditional therapy. People don't come and talk about their problems in depth, one-on-one with a therapist. They come to a group with these peer leaders who've been successful in the program. And this is the kind of things that we hear people say. I'll give you a minute to read this. And we have literally, of course, this is my favorite, so it's probably the best to me, but we have thousands of quotes like this. Kamita, do you want to share your experience actually?
Sure. Yeah, so I was actually introduced to mood lifters in January of 2021. And at the time, I was struggling with a pretty serious hip injury. I had fractured my femoral neck for like the second time, was unable to compete in sports, and was experiencing isolation from teammates. And then on top of that, it was the height of the pandemic. So was doing Zoom university and was just struggling with my mental health. And so I found mood lifters at the perfect time, had received an email through our athletic department, basically, encouraging us to sign up for the study. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I figured, I have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So I joined the study and gave mood lifters a shot. And so I just want to share with you, some of the most powerful aspects of the program from, my own perspective. Personally, I find the way we structure meetings to be extremely helpful, and that, as Patty mentioned, it's not about going through your problems and talking about them in detail, but it's really giving you these effective action-based steps that you can take and apply to your own daily life. And they're fairly easy to start implementing. And they're all research-based and touch on these, it's biopsychosocial. So it's really approaching mental health from a holistic perspective, which I really appreciated as a student athlete. And, I really got to develop this, what we like to call like a toolkit, where I had all these strategies that I could use, and it really empowered me to continue to work towards bettering my mental health. And, by the end of the program, I was ruminating less and really focusing more on the present and the things that were within my control. So it was very helpful for me in that way. And then the other benefit, the major benefit that I see, and probably the most important, is just the peer leaders. My peer leaders, Paul and Miranda, were so welcoming and created such an accepting and comfortable environment. And, there were days when I didn't necessarily want to go to meeting. It was like 7 p.m. at night. I was tired from a long day, but inevitably every time I went, I was just so happy that I, held myself accountable, and then also would leave feeling so much lighter and like I had more control over my mental health. And ultimately, these peer leaders were the ones that really inspired me to get involved in mood lifters more seriously and help people the same way that they had helped me. So those are just, 2 aspects of the program that I think are extremely powerful, especially for student athletes who, they have access, some of them, and not everyone, especially at D2 and D3 universities, Some of them have access to counselors, but some of them don't. And mood lifters, I think, can be extremely beneficial regardless of if someone's seeing a sports psych or not. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, so qualitatively, we know people like it. They come at rates that are better than traditional group therapy, and they drop out less. And that's awesome. And that was the place to start. But then we want to know, of course, are there statistically significant improvements? So across the board in every study, in every way we look at the data, we see statistically significant improvements across the board. But frankly, when you're dealing with 1,300 people, you can find little tiny effects and you can find these statistical changes. This was the start. But for me, I wouldn't be doing it if we found little tiny changes, because again, my motivation is singular, to really make a difference for people. So not only do we want statistically significant improvements, we want clinically significant improvements. And so in my field, that is, you want to see a 25% reduction. That's called the minimal clinically significant difference. So we were looking for 25% change. And I thought, if we could do that, that would be a miracle. I wasn't even expecting that, because again, peer leaders in groups in a very different than the traditional model. It feels more like a class where people can share, but they don't have to. And I built it this way on purpose. One, we don't want peers to do what we call traditional clinical process, right? Because they're not trained clinically. So instead, it feels like a class where they're sharing this. But I also knew from the literature that it wasn't that weekly meeting in any form of therapy that was the active ingredient. It is what people did in between. So that's why I really wanted to use the Weight Watchers model, where they had specifically encouraged people to do things in between meetings. Because if I went to Weight Watchers and just talked about my weight loss problem, how would that go? I actually tried that for years. I just complained about it, didn't do much. You actually have to do the program. You actually have to get involved. And so you have to do those cognitive restructuring meetings like the Stormy Night example or others in between to get better. So yes, we saw statistically significant improvements. That was a relief, but we also saw clinically significant improvements. So in this slide, this is for people with moderate to severe anxiety or depression. This anxiety is measured with the GAD-7 and the depression is measured with the PHQ-9. This was during COVID and this was before COVID. It's not about COVID anxiety. It's during those time periods. Why do I separate them out? Because once COVID hit, we had to move to online groups. And for student athletes, we'll always probably be online because we had students from all over the world that were participating. And it's just easier for them to participate online. And other groups were meeting back in person again for actually the seniors really want to meet in person. So this is our general adult program. So what you see is during COVID, pre-COVID, we had a good 30–40% reduction, but during COVID, we had even more, closer to 50% reduction, which is again, way beyond what we were hoping for with that 25% clinically significant. And just for reference, CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy affects about 30% change. So we're seeing a bigger change in these moderate to severe folks than you do with traditional therapy. That's true for depression as well. We see well over the 50% reductions. Now, remember, we take all comers. And so I told you that was moderate to severe. In general, in therapy literature, you see bigger effects with the more severe illness. This slide is a little bit complicated. What you see up here across the x-axis is how depressed, and this slide looks almost identical for anxiety as well. And up here is where they start. And here's how much change you can see. The orange line is if a hypothetical 25% reduction, and the gray line is a hypothetical 50% reduction. So what you're seeing is these mild to moderately depressed folks, adults, are sitting around the 25% reduction. You get out to these moderate, severe, you're hovering around 50% reductions. And it was, and we all know that treatment tends to work best in Yavis participants, right? So young, attractive, verbal, intelligent, high SES. And that's great. They need good care too, but I wouldn't be satisfied if that was all, right? I wanted to come up with a treatment program that worked for everyone and was offered by people that looked like them. So for example, we have a program in the town next to ours called Ypsilanti. and Ypsilanti is a mainly minority, low-income community. And so we now are able to offer it to Ypsilanti community with leaders who are actually from that community. So again, peer leaders come from the actual community. So Camille running a student athlete group would be much more effective than me running a student athlete group. They're going to trust and relate to her more. So what we see here is the orange and the blue are the pre and the post for mild to moderate. Remember, we had those 25% changes. But then you see here these moderate to severe people in the gray and the yellow. And what you see is that, again, across the board, whether it's men or women, young adults, middle age, older adults, high school graduates, college, whatever education they have, whether they're Black or white, and Native American, Asian American, or Hispanic, you'll see that we have significant changes. So it works for everyone. But one of the things that really got me into this, if you remember, is that I was really concerned about losing so many students to mental health concerns. Like I said, we did a survey in our program, and the vast majority of people who left wasn't because they lost interest, it was because of mental health concerns. So we really wanted to we take that big, huge data, and we looked at it by age groups to see how it was working for people. So the first group we looked at was young adults. And what we found, of course, again, across the board was statistically significant improvements. But again, this is all of them, just not the moderate to severe people. This was all the 18 to 22-year-olds we had. And we saw that we had a very large, more than 50% reduction in depression and anxiety. So it seems to actually work best in this age group. But it also was working really great in the graduate student age group. Again, statistically significant improvements in every measure we took. And again, in a greater than 50% reduction. So we got some funding. We had a donor that was interested in testing, particularly in this millennial or younger age group. So we did another randomized control trial. We just finished it in July. We had over 250 people in that trial. And what you see here, again, in this one, if you remember, it was graduate students were either given active mood lifters treatment or waitlist control. So you can see, again, this is the waitlist that they got worst for depression. Oh, by the way, I have to mention, this was started at the beginning of the semester or in the summer, beginning of the summer, and then it ended around finals week, the week before finals week. And so you can see that the waitlist group got worse. So those who did not get treatment had increased depression and significantly increased anxiety. This is in contrast to people in the mood lifters group. This is, I think, an easier way to see this. So these are those mild people, and these are moderate to severe depression, and this is anxiety, okay? So those who come in doing relatively okay, they're getting 30% worse during grad school. Whereas we're able to take those mild people and they're getting better by 10%. There's not a lot of room for improvement in those folks. But then look at this moderate to severe folks. Again, this is mood lifters. This is percent change. So they got 60% better than where they started. And those who were on the wait list got 30% again. So we have a 50% more improvement. And it's basically the same thing. And although we haven't tested this too much because we haven't really thought of it in this way, this really highlighted to me that we should be thinking about mood lifters potentially as a prevention program. Because we know grad school is extremely stressful, as is college, that maybe we can stop those mild depressions from happening and turning into a more moderate to severe illness. And then college athletes. College athletes also had the very best data almost we've ever seen. They improved more than 50%. I think it's like 65 to 70%. Why? Because they knew how to do this, right? It's a building program. It's like one of the athletes said, it's like brain training. It's like physical training, but for your brain. They knew how to build the skills. They'd done that their whole life. So those that took this incorporated the strategies that they used to get them to be elite athletes in the first place, and then applied it to their mental health. So again, we see these dramatic and of course statistically significant changes. And Camille is writing up that paper right now for her capstone experience. And so another population are very interested in that we've heard about from universities, they're interested in having some programming for their emeritus programs. By the way, like the athlete program was developed by mood lifters. It's a specialized program with help from a sports psychologist and exercise physiologist. And this seniors program is being developed by a colleague called Scott, whose name is Scott Roberts, and a geriatric psychiatrist, Susan Maxner. And again, we find significant changes. And here we do have some follow-up data, and this is basically what we tend to see that our results, and this is for the seniors, but we don't have a ton of data on this, so I don't want you to take this with a grain of salt, because we're just now getting follow-up on everyone. That people not only get better, but then they stay better and get a little bit better. And that's actually what we've seen, that people get depressed, they get better, and then they continue to improve. So we think we've created an affordable, available, evidence-based, and acceptable program. So in general, the most our groups cost, who's ever paying for them, is between $12 and $15 a meeting, which is way less than traditional care. They're peer-led groups, so we don't have that problem with getting enough clinicians. And it's run in groups, so it's 15 members each. It can be done virtually or in person. It eliminates wait lists and availability issues. Right now, we're working with our clinic at the University of Michigan to develop a program that's instant care, mood lifters. Now it's not group-based, but from the University Health Services are gonna send all these overwhelmed, they're overwhelmed with people to the clinic in order to be part of mood lifters. Again, everything, this is totally built on science. Everything I took, I thought was the best science out there, and I continue to test. For the adult version, it's our 6th version, because every time we get new data, we are able to improve it and change it. So I was asked recently why I think it works better than traditional care. And I think that's why, because we built it based on science, and then we continue to improve it through science. And then it's acceptable. So again, our dropout rates are much lower than people who go to traditional care. And they meet in neutral territories led by peers who've been there, the diverse, culturally sensitive. We have a much higher rate of diverse leaders, and they're coming from the very communities that they're serving. So we're also creating jobs for people and giving people like Camille, who wants to go into clinical psych grad school, maybe, some experience clinically. So how do we do this? How do we bring it to your university if you're interested? There's a few ways. You can sort of think of most expensive to least expensive, but you can also think of easiest to hardest, okay? So there's 3 options. One is you give your students, faculty, staff, emeriti faculty a coupon code for our program, and you send people to our groups that we're running online here in Ann Arbor. You can, they could come tomorrow if they want. Okay, I don't know about tomorrow, but very soon if they want. We have an athletes group that's starting soon as well. Camille, do you remember the date that that's starting?
I know it's September, Patty G, it's September 9th or something.
Okay, well, it's online. So we have an athletes group starting if you want to send your athletes to our program, but also for, we also have a what we call our full program, where we can come with our leaders like Camille, can come via online to your universities and run groups for you. A hybrid is and licensing program. We train your people to run them. Either maybe let's say you have like Camille and another student like Camille at your university run it, but you don't want to be bothered with supervision and liability and all that stuff. So we actually, you pick the leaders and the helpers, because each meeting has a leader and helper, and we actually supervise them and so on. Or you could have a licensing where you basically take our program, you license it for your whole university, and then you can use it with as many different populations as you want, as much as you want. Another thing is we're approached by the instructor of our course called Project Outreach. which is a course in psychology where students learn to go to companies in the community or organizations. And we're working on a course this fall where we're training 50 undergrads to actually be helpers and leaders in our program. And then in the spring, they're going to be running it in undergraduates at the University of Michigan through a research study. So we can help you also train your students, staff, or faculty through this course to become leaders.